Moving on now to legal updates and compliance. So what advice would you give agents for handling end of tenancy disputes? We've touched on this a little bit, but is there anything more to add, more on the kind of compliance side of things, not specifically about schemes?
Yeah, I think this is a difficult question. I think, can I come back to this one? I think maybe go on to talking about the section 21, and then yes. I'll come back to this if I can.
Yeah, no problem at all. So we've got, obviously, there are the latest plans around the abolition of section 21, as you mentioned, and changes to section 8 also. So just, do you want to just touch on your thoughts on those first of all?
Yeah, I mean, I can. I'm quite at the heart of it because I've been, I sit on a panel. It's called the Fair Possessions Coalition. It sounds like the mafia, but it's not. It's basically all the, I mean, Arlo on it, the Letting Industry Council, the landlord associations around the whole country, and we've all come together. Up until maybe a week ago, we were getting an indication that the Conservatives weren't as keen to ban Section 21. There was over 20,000 submissions on this consultation, which ended on the 12th of October. I've written a lot about this. I've been involved in this. I remember issuing my first accelerated possession claim in 1999 when it came out. There's been more and more barriers, and the word non-fault, there's always a fault, but 60 to 70% of the time, Lauren, landlords are using Section 21 because there's rent arrears, not Section 8. Obviously, last Thursday I was at a conference and there was an announcement that from Boris Johnson that Section 21 is going to be abolished, just like the other two parties. My biggest problem, and I had the government in our offices here in Bournemouth 2-3 months ago on the housing court consultation, is if you don't invest, the Ministry of Justice don't invest in the court system and get more judges and more bailiffs, because there's going to be 70%, 60-70% more hearings under Section 8, okay, to gain possession, then what will happen is landlords will lose confidence and landlords may possibly look to sell up and go. I've said very clearly that Section 21 is the biggest thing to happen in the private rental sector, bigger than the tenant fee ban, bigger than Section 24 and the abolishment of mortgage interest relief and all the legislation. We have to get this right. So what will happen is, it looks like Section 8, there's 17 grounds. It might go to 22, 24 grounds. We've been working as a group about how it looks post the ban. But there is some unintended consequences which the government haven't thought about. And that is that tenants are evicted under Section 21 because they're told to stay put by the council. It's a big, big problem because obviously we have a social housing crisis and the private rental sector picks up the pieces. A lot of tenants evicted under Section 21 are actually in arrears and they go to the council to try and be rehoused. And I show this on my TV programme on Channel 5 to highlight the problem. If it switches to Section 8 and actually they have a money order on their Section 8, what will happen is they go to the council to try and be rehoused, where previously they would have been rehoused or on a waiting list or in temporary accommodation. The council will turn around and say, well, your inventory is of £3,000-4,000. You've made yourself homeless. We can't help you. And then, of course, you have an issue with antisocial behaviour, where landlords will use the Section 21 rather than Section 8 because they can't get evidence. And then you'll find a lot of landlords and letting agents be much more stringent with referencing. So really, unfortunately, the more vulnerable tenants, and maybe tenants on housing benefit and universal credit, I think there could be a struggle there. So they really have to get this right.
Great. Suzy, do you have any thoughts to add broadly on the legislation or the changes to the legislation potentially?
No, I think Paul's pretty much covered it, and I think Section 21, will it have an impact? Not from my perspective, I don't think. No, I've nothing else to add to that.
Great, thank you for that. So do you want to now move on to talk about kind of handling end of tenancy disputes?
Yeah, I want to talk about obviously the principle hasn't changed, that a tenant just has to return the property in the same condition and standard of cleanliness that it was in when they moved in. Now that tenancy agreements have had to change since the tenant fee ban to take out all the unfair clauses, there were considerable concern about the cleaning clauses that used to be in contracts. Pets was another big issue that we know has cropped up since then.
You can't charge a pet deposit.
No.
So landlords will be charging more for rent, won't they?
Yes. I mean, that's one of the reasons that we've talked about this, and I know that there is trading standards this week have brought up the pet issue and whether even pet rent is reasonable, and their argument is not. But I mean, in my experience, if somebody has a pet, they'd rather pay extra rent than not have the pet.
Yep, I would.
You know, so landlords need to really think about this.
There's a market there.
There is absolutely a market, and there is always in the new tenancy agreements the ability to charge at the end of the tenancy for any damage, because if it's breach of contract,
yep,
not to return. So the fact that the cleaning clauses have gone and the pet clauses have gone in terms of pet deposits, it doesn't mean that landlords cannot take from a deposit or claim against a deposit alternative at the end of the tenancy. So that for me is no issue. What is an issue, and what landlords and agents really need to think about, is the evidence. It needs to be more robust than ever to make a claim, because if you don't have it, then you're not going to win. And the guidance on default fees, for example, which can go into tenancy agreements, which is the security devices and locks, and charging for rent at the end of the tenancy. Any charge that you're going to make, even under the tenant fee ban, you have to have that evidence, otherwise you cannot charge the tenant. And that's good practice across the board for anything. New carpets, redecoration, keep those invoices and make sure that you can show anybody that's negotiating at the end of the tenancy or making a decision on any of the evidence has that clear and can make a fair decision. So
great, thank you very much, Suzy. We've actually had quite a few questions come in about this. It is a big thing, and we've seen the impact of different legislation already this year. But what do you think will be the next big change in legislation over the coming 12 months for the lettings industry?
Well, I think ROPA's coming in, which is obviously making sure that letting agents will be regulated. Okay, there'll be a regulated register which the government will run. I think that makes sense to professionalise the industry. Letting agent accreditation and a qualification, maybe 15 hours CPD points, maybe even 20 hours according to Scotland. I mean, that's what we're doing. We're very proactive in this. And landlord redress is going to come in as well. The government have had that on the radar. So if you think about the unmanaged market, so the self-managed landlords, maybe 40%, there's been these figures, 40% of properties, there's what, 4.3 million dwellings or something ridiculous like that, a lot of dwellings, is landlords have to be responsible. So there has to be redress against landlords. Agents are jumping through hoops, why not landlords? So I agree with that, and we see a lot in, there's a rogue letting agent and there's a rogue landlord list. I've campaigned and wanted a rogue tenant list, and that won't happen, unfortunately. But they will be the next changes that will be on the radar. There'll be other stuff as well. We just need time to be able to bed in. But my biggest bugbear, Lauren, is you can have all this legislation, and a lot of it's political, but we have to up our game, and the private rental sector is coming up to 22%. But you have to have the enforcement. All the good guys that are going through the hoops and doing what they're doing. And we've all come across a letting agent down the road called Nickett and Scarpa Lettings, that have nicked the rent and they've closed up shop, and then they've ended up getting away with it, and trading standards haven't moved quick enough. And of course it's not, there's no joined up thinking. So we need to make sure that if all the political parties are talking about we need to do this and we need to do that in housing, we really need to make sure there is a sufficient money for support with regard to enforcement, because a lot of it is just paper talk.
Perfect, thank you. Another question that we got in from one of our attendees, they've said the abolition of Section 21 will result in the private rental sector abandoning its support for social housing overnight. This will affect the most vulnerable and needy the most. What will the government do to stop this happening?
Well, I think I answered it. So, I mean, I totally agree. So what will happen is, what can they do? Well, so what was it? I think Labour said they're going to, build a million council properties? I don't know where they're going to get the money from, but we have a social housing shortage. Rents are really high, and that's why I talk about the unintended consequences of Section 21. So get rid of Section 21. Yes, you need grounds if you want to sell the property, want to move back in. We're even going to put a ground in for access. I mean, getting access from tenants is a big problem. So, you know, how mapping it out and making sure, and whether there's an indefinite tenancy or having a longer term tenancy, which really you need to incentivize landlords, I think, because you want to give a tenant a longer term tenancy. Well, it's a relationship. So if I'm renting to you, Lauren, I want to make sure you're a good tenant, look after the property, pay the rent on time. And once you've done that, then we can have a conversation about a longer term tenancy. It makes sense. But I do worry that, you know, if there are going to be vulnerable tenants that can't get through referencing, and landlords have nice choice to think, you know what, I'm going to go with that tenant because I think they're better of a credit risk than that tenant. Then, you know, yes, you have the HMO changes, but then you'll see a lot more tenants, especially out of the southeast and London, having to move out, you know, and that's an issue as well.
Yeah, thank you. Final question now. How do you envisage the court process and associated costs changing for the landlord when Section 21 is removed? The person who sent this in is hopeful for a positive change as they think the current system is faulty.
Again, yes. So
comes down to enforcement again, doesn't it?
Well, no, yeah. So what happens is, so you have the we're talking about housing courts. The housing courts are great on paper, and you get more judges. I mean, I know what's happening on the ground. I speak to my landlord action staff. We have 10 solicitors and paralegals issuing 600 cases at a time. 60% Section 8, 40% Section 21. If the ban comes in, let's say 2023, it's all going to come to Section 8. You know, landlords evicting a tenant is a last resort. Be very clear about that. Unless their circumstances change, they get a divorce and need to move back in or sell the property. You know, there will be grounds, and there needs to be a lot more grounds under Section 8 that are made more mandatory. But you need more judges, you need more court investment. You need to have a lot more online access and make it easier. And I think that there is some really good things that the courts do. I mean, bailiffs, they work tirelessly. I mean, I was doing an eviction for the series in the last 2 series ago in Edmonton, and there was in Edmonton County Court in North London covers a big jurisdiction of property. There was only 2 bailiffs, so getting recruitment of bailiffs is an issue. Trying to maybe have high court sheriffs to do more evictions and getting leave might be easier, but if you evict tenants quicker, then it just causes a problem with regard to social housing. There's a big knock-on effect. So you have to have investment, and we don't want landlords leaving the industry because they give a great service. And if they do, and if there is an abolishment of Section 21 that comes in, then what's going to happen is landlords, you know, the government and the political parties don't want homelessness, which is obviously really high. There's only going to be more, because what's going to happen is if you don't get that confidence and you think you can't get your property back, then we're going to be really busy at land registry, because you're going to have loads of landlords serving Section 21s. Possibly the market might change, and then there'll be tenants that are being evicted, good tenants that are being evicted because landlords want to sell. So then it creates more homelessness. So I just hope that the government and the civil servants understand and engage with organisations like us and letting agents to understand what the unintended consequences can be if we get it wrong.
How much, sorry, cutting across, do you think we're looking at the Scottish model?
Yeah, possibly. And the Scottish model is that they invested in the tribunal system. They got rid of their equivalent Section 21. There was a backlog in cases, but they invested in the tribunal system. But the Scottish, you know, population's 5 million. Their tribunal sector is much smaller. Their social housing sector is much bigger, and that's most of their evictions. So you can't compare it with England. And obviously, Wales are going in, and they may change in regard to Section 21. You have to invest in the court system. And I know from speaking to a judge in Leeds, you know, the time to do when you do an accelerated possession case, it used to be, I remember, 90 seconds, 2 minutes to grant a possession or look for the paperwork. Now she said it takes 15 minutes. And the problem is to recruit judges. There's a problem with regard to morale. There's a lot of mental health. There's more violence in the courtroom. I mean, people don't see that. So trying to recruit judges is an issue. Housing court on paper seems great, but you need investment. If we don't get investment, we don't get confidence.
Great, thank you. Time flies when you're having fun. We've come to the end of our questions, but have either of you got anything else that you'd like to add to any of that?
Suzy,
no,
anything else?
I don't think so. I think we've covered a lot.
Yeah, we have covered. I mean, just my message to letting agents: you do a great job. Don't be complacent. You know, you need a strategy to find more landlords. There are more landlords out there trying to convert landlords and explain about how good you are. And if anyone is interested in training them, by all means, make contact with myself or with Suzy with regard to some of the courses that we do.
Yeah.
Great, thank you both so much for sharing your thoughts with us today.